Thank you so much for being here. This past January, I found myself in Louisiana. I was visiting a stretch along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that has earned the moniker Cancer Alley. Home to over 200 plastic and petrochemical plants, it has some of the worst air pollution in the nation, with over 50 toxic chemicals and known carcinogens in the air. Now, the communities there can face a cancer risk up to 50 times higher than the national average. And because of that, it has earned the name a sacrifice zone. In the name of single-use convenience and an economy derived from synthetic materials and fossil fuels, what we are sacrificing are the lands, lives, and cultural heritage of the predominantly Black and brown communities within St. James, St. Charles, and St. John the Baptist River Parish. Now, while I was there, I had the opportunity to meet some really incredible women that are fighting to protect their communities, protect their rich heritage they represent, fighting for their own lives. The Banner Sisters are two such women. As the co-founders and co-directors of the Descendants Project, they are fighting to dismantle the legacies of slavery and to build a resilient, healed future for the Black descendants communities within the river parishes. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Joy and Joe Banner. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
To kick us off, I'd really love to hear a little bit about your home and what you're fighting to protect there with the Descendants Project.
Yeah, so our neighborhood was originally founded by our great-grandfather about 100 plus years ago, 120 years ago. And when he started his family, and then grew his family and purchased land. It was a small, we would call it microfarming now, but purchased land. And we had a great uncle who also purchased land. And so as our neighborhood expanded and the family expanded, we lived around our family, especially our elders. And so we grew up with that history of the place and being part of a neighborhood that was also our family compound. And we just absolutely loved it. My happiest memories is being out in the yard in Louisiana, sometimes in the heat, sometimes with the mosquitoes, but just listening to those stories of their life growing up along the river, and they loved folk tales and sharing different stories. So we just grew up with a love of that history. And so, yeah, we just, first and foremost, a small rural community alongside the Mississippi River. We have the levee that protects us from the Mississippi River that we walk and bike on. So just a really lovely, green, peaceful community.
That's wonderful. And the Descendants Project is fighting to protect that area. One thing that I want to touch on is that there's a pretty clear correlation between where the petrochemical build-out is happening in your communities and this ugly correlation with plantation land, with many of these petrochemical plants being built on the physical former footprints of these plantations. Can you share with me a little bit what we lose when we build over these ugly pieces of our history, but also build in these communities that are descendant from many of the slaves that actually worked on these plantations? What's the impact there for you?
For us, it is a removal of our history and also denying what our ancestors contributed to the area. Mm-hmm. If you think of our enslaved ancestors, many of them walked from the plantations, those that were lucky, after emancipation, or the battlegrounds of the Civil War fighting for the Union, and it created the neighborhoods that we live in right now. They were the first investors in the area. They were the first infrastructure builders. So when you think of that being erased and us removed from those roots, it's really it's hard. It's hard knowing everything that we fought for could be lost. My parents who grew up in our hometown had a very happy life and raised us there, and seeing your history be wiped off for something that honestly is not needed is really a really horrible place to be. So that's why we're fighting back so hard, because we just want to protect what we have for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that so often this conversation is really kind of positioned around this idea of trade-offs, that, you know, we can protect the cultural heritage or we can create jobs. We can protect the communities or we can create economic development for them. And I actually think there's like a correlation there as well with the material conversation of these incredible synthetic materials that can do so much for our economy and yet have such negative impacts with the pollution that they create both up and downstream. So I want to touch on a little bit how you think about this framework of trade-offs and your thoughts on looking at it from this pro versus con perspective. How do you feel about that?
Well, so we call ourselves the Descendants Project because, like we said, we are descended from people that were enslaved at one or several of the hundreds of plantations that lined the Mississippi River. So we are literally on the grounds of former plantations. Those are everywhere. But I don't think that we understand, that plantations are historical corporations. And so I think that they are, for most people who don't live, in communities where there are plantations in your backyards, or if you are visiting New Orleans or visiting Louisiana to come and take a tour of a plantation, you may feel removed from what these plantations actually mean for the way that we do business now. So we have, the level of extraction, from the environment, from the people, obviously for the enslaved, men, women, and children who work there. You have so much, extraction and violence, all in the name of business. And so we talk about economic development. I'm a former business professor, and I taught 8 years and then went to work as a director of communications at a slavery museum on the grounds of a plantation. And there are things that I'm teaching, that I learned as a business student, maximize shareholders' value, the emphasis we put on profit, and then teaching and learning more about the slavery system and realizing, wow, there are things that we're doing in our current business models and the way that we approach business that literally it has not changed. And this idea of something has to be sacrificed, someone has to sacrifice, something has to die, because it means that the value, if I'm not extracting everything from it, then in my mind, that's money being lost, right? And so this idea of, what are we doing when we say economic development and progress? What are we asking for when we say profit? What are the sacrifice? Someone is sacrificing for it. Just to get, when it comes down to these trade-offs, somebody is being sacrificed. Somebody is being sacrificed. You're not seeing it, or you think you're not seeing it, but it's people in my community that we know that are in chemotherapy treatments as we speak, because we won't stop producing plastics. Yeah. Right. So you have to be able to see it. You have to see the pollution. You have to smell it. You have to taste it. You have to see it every day. We can't escape it. In order for us to understand, this is the impact that we're having on people's lives.
It's exceedingly powerful. Yeah. Another round of applause. Well, again, thank you so much for everything you're doing to protect those people and protect your community. It's exceedingly powerful to hear. I know that you actually came to circularity from Paris. We were hearing a bit about the Global Plastic Treaty negotiations yesterday on the main stage, and you were there. I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience there. What does success look like coming out of this based on your place in the ecosystem as a stakeholder in that community?
Success for me looks like embracing the fact that recycling will not solve the problem. We cannot recycle our way out of this. Recycling, taking something that's made from a toxic substance, you cannot make that into something that's not toxic. And even when you are recycling that, it's going to a community next door to it, probably our communities. So that's the real, I hope that message comes through, that we are bending ourselves in pretzels, trying to make plastic work. And it just doesn't. Because without someone getting sick, as Joy mentioned, dying from cancer, but before you die from cancer, you suffer from cancer. There are people who are taking 2 types of painkillers in order to just make it to the next day. So I want everyone to understand the ramifications of it. Being in Louisiana, we've gone through our fair share of hurricanes. And if you've ever evacuated from a natural disaster or a storm, there's something called contraflow, which means that all traffic is stopped and everything moves out of the area. So everything, the system that we're used to, guess what, is stopped. And within a day, everything flows in the other way. And that's exactly what we need for plastic, contraflow. We all need to move away from it. We need to stop making excuses for it, trying to make economy off of it, stop giving fossil fuel a lifeline, because we have proven that we cannot live next to it. And we come from, thank you, we come from family members who work in petrochemical. This is part of our culture too. So we're not saying this as if we're an alien and we're looking down. It's part of our family and our culture and our life and part of our lives. But we've seen too many people suffer and too many people deal with sickness from it. So I hope that we have made, that's one of the messages we were trying to communicate, and we work with several different environmental justice groups when we were in Paris. So it's not just my community, it's other communities, indigenous communities, communities in Pennsylvania and all, who are feeling the same type of strategy and tactics being used. So that we tried our best to intervene, and we'll keep intervening as much as we can.
Oh, well done.
Well, and I just add to, nobody is off the hook, including ourselves, in terms of materials. Because as we talk about plastics, but, what we have right across about a half a mile from us is an aluminum producing bauxite plant. We have mercury in the soil because of it, right? And so I'm sitting here with an aluminum bottle, but there is an impact to someone there. So everything that we do, the way that we consume, has an impact on someone. And so we just have to be mindful, and then come back to the humanity of it all, right? And even the language that we use, I'm seeing things like negative externalities and, linear systems, and I'm like, what the hell is this? So you're going to come into my community, right, with council members and decision makers, and that's going to look at these words and like, yeah, negative externality. Yeah, you right. Okay, yeah. Great, right? And then you have that language has allowed access to coming in and polluting my community, because no one is going to stop and say, I don't understand what you are talking about. Break it down in human forms for me to understand. And we get stuck with the pollution and the ramifications of it. We have children in our communities with diseases that are rare across the United States if you get 4 cases. It's that rare. We have 4 cases within 2 neighboring parishes alone. We have our asthma rates, asthma hospitalization rates, I think are double the countries, right? Double the states. Our poverty, going back to, the economic development and jobs. We have 14 industries in St. John the Baptist Parish. We have our GDP is the same as a country of Switzerland. Yet our poverty rate is double that of the countries and 1/3 that over the states. So your jobs and your economic development, I don't know who it's working for, but it sure ain't working for us. And we're sacrificing our communities and, our land, and companies are coming in and getting tax breaks, and we are being stuck with the disaster, that these companies leave us.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm still jet lagged, so my filter is not.
I love it. Keep going. So much of I think the conversation, particularly in Paris, and when we talk about plastics and all of these materials, is really talking about the downstream impacts, the how can we solve this with recycling? And I think so often the conversation isn't really deterred back to that upstream impact, which is where you're sitting in your communities. So I'm glad that you're fighting and pushing our attention back upstream and thinking about how do we reduce, not just recycle and resolve once it's out in the world.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we have this huge community of sustainability leaders here. And I want to ask you, what call to action do you have for them? How can they get involved to help you with the work that you are doing to protect your communities and to continue to push these voices in the kind of conversations that are happening in Paris and elsewhere to make sure that we're acknowledging your role in the system and your place as a stakeholder in this?
For me, I think what would be helpful is a realization that your product is not the container that it comes in, that we buy your products or use products based on the benefits it gives us. However you give us those products is how we're going to get that product. So for us, and I'm just talking about the, for me, having that, I will get that and however you present it. And so there's a lot of control that you have over how we buy your product. We don't want to buy your trash. I don't want to deal with the trash being produced. I don't want to deal with the trash and disposing of it and then feeling guilty when I can't dispose of it. So all of those go into what I want to just to keep bringing up is that we shouldn't have to deal with your trash. There are great systems out there, I think, that have been used before. What happened to many of these businesses that existed before plastic was in the economy? They operated, right? They went maybe sometimes over 100 years without it. So tapping back into the systems that were in the past that were used successfully should be something that you're looking into. And also, I just want you all to remember, too, it's about environmental justice. And I have to say, throughout this conference and sitting on the panels, I haven't heard that term used a lot. Mm-hmm. You have to focus on environmental justice. Environmental racism has to be part of your solution. And what I don't want to hear is that, oh, well, I went to my finance team and they said it was too expensive. If it was your family member dying of cancer, would it be too expensive? Right. It would not be. So I ask you to think of us. This is why we're here. And honestly, it's hard for us to be here when we have some of the biggest users in the world, right? But we're here because we want you to know that we are people, we have families, we exist. We will not be ignored, but we really want you to help us through the situation as we just try to be healthy and happy. And I have confidence that you all will help us get there.
Well, my last question is really about this amazing energy that you're bringing to the conversation. How do you maintain that energy and that courage to continue this fight? Because I can see it's a power in you. It's truly impressive. How do you maintain that?
That's a feisty Louisiana spirit.
I love it.
Yeah, all the hot sauce. No, but no. In all seriousness, I think the bittersweet of our existence and our experience is that we are so close and so close to our history. Mm-hmm. And, having a connection and having a knowledge of our ancestors and what they sacrificed for us and how we truly, I have to imagine that they prayed for us to have freedom and liberation and for us to be able to be in this spot, in this space and have the power and understanding that we have the power to fight back and that we're winning some battles throughout Cancer Rally, and our communities are realizing the power of us as a people, understanding that nobody needs to come in and save us. Mm-hmm. Nobody needs to come in and give us wisdom that we already have, mm-hmm. right? And we don't need people to come and give us the same like plantation paternalism of you need us. We should have the authority, the ability, not the authority, but the ability in the agency. If you're lucky, we'll invite you into our community if that's what we feel. But we don't need anyone coming in there and telling us what we need or what to do, mm-hmm. right? And I guess I just that drives us to stay motivated and stay energized. But I do need to do a better job of of finding some self-care moments. Yeah. And take it. I will admit that it's just we're in the middle of 4 different lawsuits. At the moment, we're fighting a grain terminal. So when we talk about all of these different materials, well, industry has gotten creative and crafty, and they've said, well, maybe putting a chemical plant in the parish is too obvious, that pollution. But if it's a grain terminal, nobody understands how much pollution is involved with grain. No one is going to understand that we're coming in and would destroy my community by somebody who claims to be a person, an impact investor, who's greenwashing and telling us that we need those jobs. So we have to be careful, and we're fighting on a lot of different fronts in order to protect our community.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you're doing, the energy, the hot sauce that you're bringing to this conversation, and everything that you're doing for the river parishes. Everyone, please join me in giving a round of applause to the Banner Sisters.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.